Epilepsy is one of the most common neurological conditions affecting around 630,000 people in the UK. Charity is now warning there's a lack of specialist nurses to help treat people with the condition.
On top of this, many with the disorder also say they have mental health issues like anxiety and depression.
Well, we're joined in the studio by BBC broadcaster Steve Crossman, Rebecca Smith from Epilepsy Action and Professor Tony Marsden from the University of Liverpool. Very good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
I should say, it's interesting, Steve, you have epilepsy.
Yes.
And I was just intrigued. A moment ago, you were asking the professor questions.
Yes.
Even you, having lived with it for pretty much all your life, there is a lot of questions to be answered. A lot of people won't know much about it, which is the point, in a way, isn't it? Do you want to just tell me a little bit of your experiences? Because this has affected you directly at work when you're trying to do your work. Can you explain one of those circumstances for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have, or had, touch wood, I've not had one now for 4 years. I'm 4 years seizure-free. I've had full, what we call tonic-clonic seizures. So those are the full seizures that maybe people hopefully not have witnessed, where you would see someone collapse and spasm and they can lose bladder control and they're foaming at the mouth. That's a tonic-clonic seizure. That is the worst that epilepsy looks to somebody looking at it. So those are the kind of seizures that I've had. The worst one I had was in Rio at the Olympics in 2016, when, for the first and only time, I could feel the seizure coming on. So I had the physical feeling, almost sort of felt like my brain shutting down is what it felt like. And I can kind of vividly remember, you know, hearing people sort of around me screaming because they were witnessing what was happening to me.
So you were conscious of it happening?
I was conscious as it happened for about 10 seconds. And then after that, I was kind of, you know, I woke up, paramedics, all that kind of thing.
I mean, in a way, can you just do the really basic explainer, good morning, Professor,
Good morning,
of what was happening to Steve in that moment in time?
Yes, so when somebody's having a seizure, what's happening is there's abnormal excessive electrical activity happening in the brain. And for someone like Steve, that happens suddenly on both sides of the brain at the same time. And at the start of that, you can be conscious and aware, and usually the warning that people have as the seizure's coming on is pretty brief. And then they lose consciousness. And as Steve's just described, the most common seizure that we would recognise, somebody would go stiff and then start to shake. Seizures usually last a couple of minutes. It's quite frightening to watch, but the shaking and the stiffness will usually last about up to 2 minutes, and then people will be unresponsive and maybe snoring and take a while to recover from that.
But what we're not at the bottom of yet is why that happens and why it happens to different people at different times in a different way. Epilepsy is almost a catch-all term for a bunch of neurological conditions.
That's right. So we could think about seizures being a symptom of something that's gone wrong in the brain. And we talk about epilepsy as a single condition. It's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of different conditions which result in seizures. And it's something that can happen at any age. So we often think about epilepsy as being a condition of childhood, and it's definitely commonly starts in childhood. But because our population is getting older, it's actually more common to diagnose epilepsy in the elderly than it is in children, because as we're getting older, our brains are affected by degeneration and strokes and other things.
So those are kind of explaining the moments in a way, Rebecca, but the knock-on effect of that on people's lives more generally is what? You've been doing some work in that.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a couple of surveys recently trying to sort of identify sort of the links with mental health. The statistics are 87% of people with epilepsy talk about the fact it creates mental health issues. So that's, it goes side by side almost, the two things. But I think the flip side of that was we did a public survey to try and understand people's perceptions. And there's this real fear of epilepsy. There's a stigma to it. So 30% said they didn't want to be in a room with someone in case they had a seizure, not even if they were having a seizure. And you can imagine for people working, that's a really horrible feeling to think that people don't want to be in the same room as you.
So almost a third of people said, I don't want to be in a room with someone with epilepsy, not with someone with epilepsy having a seizure.
No, exactly, yeah, in case they had a seizure. So, and it is that people are fearful of it. And when, Tony's explaining it, actually, it's something that happens briefly, usually. And, people then recover from it. And the people having the seizure, they know how to deal with it.
I suppose in a way that would encourage people not to say and not to be open about it for fear that people had a reaction like that, which in itself brings pressures.
Yeah, and then that has an impact on your mental health. So it's a vicious circle.
Have you experienced, I mean, how do you operate? I mean, you work in broadcasting, which it's a workplace like any other. It's not unique in that, is it? But, you know, do you feel you have to say? I mean, do you feel like some kind of obligation or that it's better?
I feel a personal obligation to it, because what I wouldn't want is for my colleagues to witness it and not know what to do. Of course. And also because the mental health impact, I would say, on me has been pretty extreme, but also it can be extreme on people witnessing it. You know, it's not just my wife who understands what the condition is and understands that it's possible that I may have a seizure. You know, my sister had epilepsy as well, and my first real memory of her having a seizure is being woken up in the morning to the sound of her falling down the stairs, having had a seizure. And sadly, she died from her epilepsy as well. So it has a huge mental health impact on everybody in the circle around somebody with epilepsy. But from a workplace perspective, I mean, I actually find it OK, because as a broadcaster, when I'm on air, I'm so focused, it's actually a distraction. Yeah. So I don't really think about it. But in terms of other people around me and colleagues, I want them to be aware for their own sake as much as my sake, because it can be it can be a harrowing thing to witness.
Professor, that what to do question. I mean, a lot of people hearing Steve's story are going to be thinking, well, maybe I'm one of those people who'd be thinking I'd rather not be there. Give us some practical advice.
So it's really important to demystify epilepsy, isn't it, and reassure people that there are simple things that they can do to help take care of somebody whilst they're having a seizure. The important thing is, whilst somebody is in the kind of the stiff and shaking bit of the seizure, is to just make sure that there's nothing around them that they could harm themselves on, and when the seizure's over, to lie them on their side and get them into the recovery position. As I said, seizures usually only last a couple of minutes, and people will, with an established diagnosis of epilepsy, they won't necessarily need to go to hospital if they've had one of their usual seizures. But if the seizure goes on for more than 5 minutes, that's definitely a time to call an ambulance and get paramedics along to help deal with the situation.
And you can hear from listening to that, and I'm so sorry for your loss, that there must be that low-level anxiety all the time. What is the environment around me? If this creeps up on me now, you can see why that would impact mental health every single day.
Absolutely. I mean, Steve's story, there's so many elements to it that other people will identify with who have the condition, you know, because it is not only you're living with the condition and that's having an impact on you, but there is also what else could happen, the uncertainty. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. And I think for the rest of us who don't have the condition, we've got to stop making it worse. You know, we've got to understand that this is something that people live with, and we've got to understand more about it.
And what Tony said, it could be any of us at any point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 79 people a day are diagnosed with epilepsy.
What about care? I mean, I think we mentioned the lead-in about the lack of specialist nurses, for example. How great is the shortage?
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation for epilepsy specialist nurses is that there's 9 for every 500,000 people. We've got 2 for every 500,000 people in the UK. Neurologists, again, we are 7 times less neurologists per 100,000 than in Germany, 3 times less than in France. So we've got a long way to go with this. And that's partly the issue, is that if the public, the public need to sort of understand more about epilepsy, and they're only going to do that if there's the workforce there as well supporting it.
Steve, what was your experience of getting help, or either medical or psychological? I don't know. What was your experience?
So my experience of getting psychological help has been great. I mean, one of the knock-on effects of my anxiety is after the seizure I had in Rio. I mean, it took me 6 months to broadcast again, so I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as well as, anxiety conditions. So I'm still on medication now. I've had great therapy. It's been brilliant. From the point of view of the actual epilepsy, my experience has been helped by the fact that we sort of as a family already knew a specific neurologist that we wanted to go with because he'd spent so long working with my sister. My sister had had epilepsy from as long as I can remember. She was 3 years older than me. Mine didn't develop until I was at university. So we kind of almost had a pathway there, but she didn't. So as an example, this is it disproportionately affects people from non-upper class backgrounds, as you can imagine, because if you want to pay for a private consultation, that's a lot easier than going through the NHS. I know it's particularly bad in the northeast of England, which is where I'm from. As an example, my sister, all her epilepsy care, we live near Middlesbrough, had to be in Leeds. So that was a long way away, time out of school, all that kind of thing. So it was difficult then, and from the sounds of it, it's even more difficult now.
And those are going to all be barriers to people getting help.
That's true, and I think we've got a kind of a history in the UK of not training enough neurologists and appointing enough specialist nurses. We've been on a journey to increase the number of people that we're training, but clearly we need to continue to do that. But on top of that, as has been highlighted, we've got massive variation in the country, so that we've got places like London, which have got almost more neurologists than you can shake a stick at in some respects, and other bits of the country where there's a real dearth of access to services. So it's really important that there is that investment in and training and getting the system to work together, because people with epilepsy don't only need to see a neurologist, they need to see a GP, they might need to see an obstetrician if they're a woman, they might need to see a whole range of other specialists, and we've got to get the whole thing working together, and there's a real challenge, I think, to get that.
And as we see from the mental health problems, also having that psychological support as well. Thank you very much.
Good to demystify things to a degree.
Really interesting.
Do you want to do a free plug for what you're on?
It's so odd, doesn't it? I'm on 5 Live from noon. There you go, with 5 Live Sport.
You've put the face to the name now, Charlie, haven't you?
Yes.
The voice, sorry.
Can I do a free plug for National Epilepsy Week next week?
Absolutely.
So epilepsy.org.uk. Find out. If you don't know anything about epilepsy, now's your chance.
It's been a brilliant education for me, actually.
Really, learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
This is